When people talk about the greatest Star Wars movie ever made, the answer is usually The Empire Strikes Back. It's darker, it's more mature, and it has one of the greatest twists in cinema history. But what if we've been overlooking the movie that had the hardest job of them all? Return of the Jedi had to finish the story. It had to complete Luke Skywalker's journey. It had to redeem Darth Vader. It had to defeat the Emperor. And it had to end the original Star Wars trilogy in the way that audiences would remember forever. And somehow it also gave us some of the most ambitious practical effects and model works ever put on screen. Now I know what some people are thinking. What about The Empire Strikes Back? And I completely understand that argument. Empire is fantastic. But Return of the Jedi is often treated as the third best movie in the original trilogy, without people actually considering what it had to achieve. Because A New Hope created the world. The Empire Strikes Back made the world darker and more complicated. But Return of the Jedi had to bring everything together. And today I want to look at why it might be the most underrated Star Wars movie, and why its storytelling, practical effects and behind the scenes achievements make a very strong argument for it being the greatest. The impossible job. The Empire Strikes Back ends with the revelation that changes Star Wars forever. Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. It's an incredible twist, but there's something important to remember. Empire gets to end almost immediately after revealing it. It doesn't have to deal with the consequences. That responsibility falls entirely on Return of the Jedi. And what does Luke do when he discovers the most feared man in the galaxy is his father? Does he hate him? Does he try to destroy him? Does he accept that Anakin Skywalker is gone forever? Or does he believe there's still good inside Darth Vader? That question becomes the emotional heart of Return of the Jedi, and for the first time in the original trilogy, Luke has completely clear purpose. He doesn't just want to leave Tatooine. He doesn't just want to become a Jedi. He wants to save his father. Luke Skywalker has changed. The opening of Return of the Jedi immediately shows us that Luke Skywalker is no longer just that farm boy from Tatooine. When he walks into Jabba the Hutt's palace, he's calm, he's confident, he's in control. And then of course there's the green lightsaber. For the first time, Luke feels like a fully realised Jedi. But what makes this version of Luke interesting isn't how powerful he's become. It's how he decides to use that power. Luke isn't trying to defeat Vader to prove himself. He isn't searching for revenge. He genuinely believes his father can be saved, despite Obi-Wan thinking he's gone. The Emperor sees Vader as nothing more than a weapon, and Luke refuses to believe that Anakin has completely disappeared, and it's that belief that defines Luke. ILM had to learn how to do the impossible. But Return of the Jedi wasn't just the conclusion to the story. It was also the point where everything Star Wars had learned behind the scenes finally came together. When A New Hope was being made, George Lucas and Industrial Light and Magic were doing things that had never been seen on that scale before. They were creating new ways to film miniature spaceships. They were developing motion control technology. And they were effectively inventing an entirely new filmmaking language whilst making a film. Then The Empire Strikes Back pushed those techniques even further. But by the time Return of the Jedi entered production, ILM had changed completely. They had more experience, more equipment, more artists, and years of problem solving behind them. They had also worked on major effects films in between: Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., Poltergeist, Dragon Slayer, Star Trek II. So by the time they returned to the Star Wars universe, they weren't learning everything from scratch anymore. They knew how to approach the impossible. One of the best examples of that creativity, and my absolute favourite scene in all of Star Wars, is the speeder bike chase. Even today, that sequence feels incredibly fast. Luke and Leia race through the forest with those biker scouts chasing them, and it's the speed that makes that entire scene feel dangerous. One wrong move and somebody could fly straight into a tree. As they do. But the actors obviously weren't flying through the forest at those speeds. It's those scenes that were filmed separately. The real challenge was creating those rushing Endor backgrounds. Visual effects supervisor Dennis Muren worked with Steadicam inventor Garrett Brown to develop an unusual solution. They moved through the forest whilst filming at an incredibly low frame rate, almost 1 frame per second. So when the footage was played back at a normal pace, it looked like they were rushing through the forest. And suddenly the characters looked like they were flying through Endor at an impossible speed. There was no computer-generated forest. There was no digital camera movements. It was a practical solution created through experimentation. And that's why I love it. When the filmmakers on Jedi encountered a problem, they didn't use a computer program. They experimented, they tested ideas, and sometimes they invented a brand new technique just for one sequence. The Rancor and practical creatures. Then there's the Rancor. When Luke is dropped beneath Jabba's palace, he's suddenly face to face with one of the largest Star Wars characters ever put on screen. And the Rancor is just another example of filmmakers experimenting with different techniques to make it work. It needed to feel enormous, it needed movement, and it needed personality. But most of all, it needed to interact convincingly with Luke. The final result gives us one of the most memorable creatures in the entire Star Wars saga, and it's those practical effects that you get are very difficult to recreate digitally, as we saw with the Book of Boba Fett. It didn't feel right. Physical models have real texture, they occupy real space, they react to real lighting. And when you see some of the techniques behind them, there's a physical quality to that Rancor that makes it feel real. The Rancor isn't just a visual effect, it's an actual creature that lives underneath Jabba's palace. The model work and the Battle of Endor. But the biggest technical achievement in Return of the Jedi is that finale battle. The battle for Endor is enormous. You have X-Wings, you have A-Wings, you have TIE Fighters, the Millennium Falcon, the second Death Star. And these weren't computer-generated spaceships, they were physical models. Highly detailed miniature spacecraft filmed with motion control. And it was that allowed the filmmakers to repeat precise camera movements, to combine multiple elements into the same shot. And I think that's one of the reasons why the original trilogy still feels so real. The ships have weight because they were physically built. They have real lighting, real shadows, real surfaces. It's those tiny details that the camera captured. And it was the fact they used multiple filming techniques all combined together. Miniature models, live action cockpit footage, explosions. And then there's layer after layer of various different spacecraft. All of those elements had to combine to create one huge space battle. And there was so much visual effects work that the production had to divide the effects into separate sections. Different teams focusing on different shots. That feels surprisingly modern. Large visual effects films even now divide those shots between different studios, different teams. Return of the Jedi was already using that approach. The scale was just simply too large for one team to manage alone. 3 battles, 1 ending. For me, what makes that final battle so impressive isn't just the technical achievement. Everything is connected to the story. That battle is happening on 3 fronts. On Endor, Han, Leia and the rebels are trying to destroy the shield generator. In space, the rebel fleet discovers it's been trapped and they're fighting for survival. And inside the Death Star, Luke Skywalker is facing Darth Vader and the Emperor. 3 completely different battles on 3 different locations, but everything is connected to that singular story. The shield has to fall before the Death Star can be attacked. The rebel fleet has to survive long enough to take advantage. And Luke has to make the biggest decision of his life. And as each storyline reaches its conclusion, the tension builds. The shield goes down, the rebel fleet attacks, the Millennium Falcon enters the Death Star, and Luke finally realises what it means to be a Jedi. Luke, Vader, and the Emperor. The throne room sequence is the true emotional climax of the original trilogy. The Emperor wants Luke to give in to anger. He wants Luke to hate Vader. He wants Luke to destroy Vader and take his place, and for a moment it almost works. Luke becomes angry, he attacks Vader, he overwhelms him. And when Vader threatens Leia, Luke loses control. He cuts off Vader's hand, but when Luke looks down, he sees Vader's mechanical arm. He then sees his own mechanical hand, and suddenly he understands. If he gives in to anger, he becomes exactly like his father. And it's that moment that brings Luke's entire journey together. Being a Jedi isn't about the power. It isn't about winning a lightsaber duel. It isn't about beating your enemies. It's about choosing compassion when anger could be easier. Luke throws away his lightsaber and says, "I am a Jedi like my father before me." Goosebumps. Darth Vader's redemption. And then the story comes full circle. The Emperor attacks Luke with Force lightning, Darth Vader watching. And without needing a single line of dialogue, we understand the choice he has to make. He looks at the Emperor, he looks at his son, And it's at that moment Anakin Skywalker returns. Vader destroys the Emperor and he saves Luke. And after years of fear, anger, hate, destruction, Darth Vader performs one completely selfless act. He sacrifices himself for his son. And that is why Return of the Jedi works. Luke doesn't defeat Vader, he saves him. And then Luke removes Vader's mask, and for the first time he sees his father. Not Darth Vader, not the monster in the black armour, Anakin Skywalker. And Anakin tells his son he was right, there was good inside him. Luke's greatest victory wasn't destroying the Emperor, it was refusing to give up on his father. But what about the Ewoks? Now I know some people are going to say, but what about the Ewoks? And yes, that is people's biggest criticism of Return of the Jedi. Some fans think they were too cute, some fans think they're there only to sell toys. And some still can't accept that the Empire was defeated by a load of teddy bears with sticks and rocks. But I think the Ewoks serve an important purpose. The Empire believes it's unstoppable. They have enormous warships, thousands of soldiers, the second Death Star. The Empire is so confident in their own power, they can't imagine losing to something they don't consider a threat. And that arrogance becomes its weakness. The Ewoks aren't stronger than the Empire, they don't have better technology, but they know their world. They understand the forest and they are fighting to protect their home. The Empire loses because it believes the Ewoks are powerless, and it's that idea that fits Star Wars perfectly. Even the smallest people can make a difference. Why Return of the Jedi works? Now, Return of the Jedi isn't perfect. The reveal that Luke and Leia are siblings feels rushed. The Ewoks aren't for everybody. And parts of the movie are definitely lighter than The Empire Strikes Back. But the movie doesn't have to be perfect to be the greatest. What matters is it achieved what it set out to do. And Return of the Jedi had the hardest job of the entire original trilogy. It had to finish the story. And it did. It completed Luke Skywalker's journey. It redeemed Darth Vader. It defeated the Emperor. It ended the Empire, and it gave audiences an emotional conclusion that still works 40 years later. But it also showed how far Star Wars had come behind the scenes. From filmmakers struggling to invent techniques in A New Hope, to an experienced ILM team creating enormous battles, practical creatures, and some of the most ambitious special effects ever put on screen. Return of the Jedi was the moment everything came together. The story, the characters, the practical effects, the model work, the music, the emotion, and the spectacle. A New Hope may have changed cinema forever. The Empire Strikes Back may have the greatest twist, but Return of the Jedi carries the entire emotional weight of the trilogy. It's the payoff, it's the conclusion, it's the heart, and a surprisingly simple story. A son believed there was still good inside of his father, and in the end, he was right. But what do you think? Have I convinced you? Is Return of the Jedi the greatest Star Wars movie? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the story and the filmmaking behind Return of the Jedi, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for some more film and TV content. Thanks for watching.